exciting to be here to talk to you, actually. I mean, this is probably my first, I do quite a lot of blockchain, events, and I do speak at a lot of events across the world, but I think the excitement was for me to be here back in my continent. I mean, I'm from Zambia myself, so it was quite exciting just coming home. I feel like I'm coming home. It's fantastic to be here. In terms of, I don't actually have that yet. So in terms of looking at blockchain and sustainable growth, I think this is something that I haven't really heard so much about. Somebody mentioned earlier on that we haven't really heard about GDP and growth, which is absolutely significant and very, very important. And certainly what we are looking at the British Blockchain Association, even if it is the British Blockchain Association, is very much focusing on global activity and interacting and working with partnerships across the world. So one of the main things that I am focused on is very much looking at what are the opportunities within blockchain for Africa specifically. So my talk today will be very much focused around that. What does it actually mean? How can we actually tap on the technology for Africa specifically, and how can we help to grow the continent using tapping the technology, and not just the technology on its own. At the business school, we're very much looking at the overall digital economy. We are in the fourth industrial revolution at the minute, and it is moving at a very speedy pace. So it is very important that I think we keep to pace with it, but at the same time, we actually be quite realistic about the opportunities that are within it. So one of the areas that I am very, very focused on is I'm looking at things like trade and investment. Across Africa, there's a big push at the minute to look at interregional trade, for example. A lot of the countries have signed up to the free trade agreement, which is a fantastic step, I think, for the continent. But at the same time, how are we actually tapping on trade? How are we revolutionizing trade and ensuring that, trade is accessible, it's inclusive, and it's also affordable? So one of the areas that we are actually looking into is about the opportunities that trade can present for the continent. What are the new markets that we can go into? What are the opportunities around, data? And do we have enough data, for example? Are we collecting enough data? Are we protecting that data? I think with blockchain and DLT solutions, there's certainly opportunities to tap on that and look at how we can capitalize on data opportunities to grow the continent. One of the significant challenges, I think it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. Africa is a youthful continent. It's a young continent. There's a lot of young people, and young people who are very tech savvy as well. Young people who are ready to grab the opportunity, but do need to be skilled up, do need the support around access to finance and around access to business opportunities. So are we actually looking at supporting those useful populations? The other issue that I like to look at blockchain is very much around value. It's about value creation and tapping on global value chains. So are we actually being able to understand from a blockchain perspective, from a technology perspective, if we are using blockchain as a key, as an enabler, to potentially, tap on the value. We've heard throughout the conference about the opportunities of a blockchain to actually help create value, store value, but also in terms of how do we ensure the sustainability of that value creation. I'll give you an example. I think most of us love music. I love my Afrobeats, I love my pop, I love my rock, I love all sorts of music. But do we actually feel that a lot of the people who create that content, who create that value, are getting the value or are being remunerated properly for their opportunities? Not always. There are a lot of sort of disputes and conflicts around royalties, for example, in music. Blockchain can help with managing that. Blockchain can help with making a little bit more transparent in terms of who is, who's accorded what in music, who is supposed to be paid what and when. So I think it's very, very exciting times in terms of, value creation and tapping on value. Another area I do really like to look at is not necessarily, we've heard so much talk around and hype, to be honest, around blockchain and, we hear big buzzwords, blockchain, AI. What do they actually mean in the sense of, the digitization of trade, the digitalization of products and services? We're moving towards a future where people want to understand a little bit more, what does it actually mean for me in my home? What is this going to mean in terms of creating opportunities and value for me in my house, in my business, in my job? The future is very digitized. We're heading towards a digital economy. I no longer suggest that businesses should be sitting and thinking, let's write a digital strategy. In fact, the digital revolution is here now. That should be embedded throughout your business processes, throughout your interactions. So it's not a conversation that should be had, but something that should be embedded on a day-to-day day basis in terms of activity. We're talking about important areas around things like identity and ownership. How do we know, who owns what? How do we ensure that, that ownership is retained by the right people? We've heard about sovereign identity and the opportunities with that. There are many people who've lost our identity. There are many people who've had, who've had to flee their countries and no longer have access to identity, which excludes them from the system and society. Very important to tap on the tools that are there to help integrate that. And more importantly, looking at this sort of more business opportunities, I think it's very, very significant. As the speaker earlier touched upon the opportunity about how we should stop focusing so much on the tech. I don't think it is about the tech anymore. I think we've had that conversation. We've heard a lot about the tech. It's very much about the opportunities that the tech can present. SMEs are huge. I don't hear enough excitement and conversations around SMEs. 90% of businesses across Africa are SMEs. But are they equipped with the right skills? Do they have access to the right capital and finance? Not always the case. That's one of the challenges. I speak to a lot of SMEs across the continent and across the world who are struggling with access to finance, who are struggling to get collateral from the bank or from wherever else because they don't have the credit worthiness. There are new alternative sources of finance, which is very exciting. And again, going back to crypto and blockchain, the opportunities there to provide, greater access to capital, which I think is fundamental for the continent in terms of growth. If we are going to fuel these engines of growth, which are SMEs, then we are going to grow our national economies. So it's absolutely fundamental that we look at how we tap onto that. So it's about transparency. Talk about things like compliance. I used to work in banking myself. Compliance is huge for banks. It's huge in order for us to be compliant and to ensure that we've got the right KYC information. Again, technology, blockchain can help with that. It costs a huge amount of money. Over 300 billion, I think, was spent in banking fines as a result of lack of compliance. So there's no alternative about having, the right compliance there. So it's very, very important to tap on the technologies around that. Cybersecurity and security, this is significant, this is huge. So many times a lot of, huge organizations and huge government struggle with cybersecurity. There are so many hacks going on at the end of the world. Can we tap on these technologies? Not necessarily just blockchain, but AI as well, to ensure that, we're looking at cybercrime. We're looking at things like anti-money laundering. How do you ensure that we tap on this technology to do that? I think blockchain can help with that, with its transparency and opportunities for decentralization approach. And then very much smart contracts, which of course I won't go into too much details, but I think smart contracts, even though the word is smart, isn't necessarily smart, but at the end of the day, it does have a purpose if it is rightly, as the last speaker said, if it's rightly designed, if it is implemented in the right format, it can help with speeding up things, ensuring that certain functions happen as and when they're supposed to happen. So for example, I sell you my goods, the minute that I sell you my goods, you receive your goods. I don't necessarily have to worry about, I haven't got paid, Sam hasn't given me my money. The smart contracts can help to execute payments straight away. Talking about efficiency, cost savings, and interaction, global interaction, which is so exciting with this technology. Efficiency savings, again, which I won't touch up to, a lot on because a lot of speakers have already done that. But equally so, what really is exciting, I go back to the concept of global value chains. We're no longer in isolation, even though, the rest of the world, we are facing unprecedented issues. Countries are kind of fighting with amongst each other. We've got issues around global trade wars. We have issues around uncertainty. Back in the UK ourselves, we're grappling with the big B, the Brexit. There's so many challenges, I think global challenges that will affect the continent as a whole, will have some impact on the continent. But I actually think there's opportunities for the continent here because of everything else that's happening. It's time for the continent to actually tap on the difficulties that we're facing and actually, take advantage and leverage the opportunities. For example, with Brexit, leverage opportunities to negotiate really fantastic trade deals. For example, start setting the terms, be a global player, because there's no reason not to. We've got the right talent, we've got the right skills, but they do need the support. But we do need to be in a place where we are aiming to be a global player in the world. Africa is a huge continent. There are many countries across Africa, and many countries that are growing across Africa. Ethiopia, over 8%, growth predicted. Rwanda, Eastern African countries, fantastic, are doing, phenomenal stuff. And I think if we carry on like that and we start to look more strategically about the opportunities that are presented, then, there are massive opportunities for the continent as a whole. So areas that I have touched up on, of course, growth is important. But one thing I really haven't heard that much about, which is fundamental in this area, is education. If we're not going to look at, if we're looking at mass adoption, we're looking at sorting out the problems we talked about, scalability and a whole range of other areas, we have to educate, and we don't have to just educate on blockchain necessarily. We're talking about digital skills as a whole. We're talking about the future skills for young people. We've got high levels of, youth unemployment here in the continent. Are we skilling up our young people to be in position to influence those global value chains I talked about? What do we need to do to educate, especially around blockchain? It's a very new area. We need to educate, we need to provide opportunities for young people to grow. Yesterday I spoke to a lady from the Satoshi Center who is doing exactly that, but has very little support. We need to be able to provide access to finance, to opportunities like that, where she is helping coders, young people. And not everybody has to code. There are many journeys, many avenues for job opportunities for young people. So it's about skilling up people, skilling up our young people as well. Financing I've touched about. Financing is critical, I think. It's huge. Without financing, without access to capital, there are limitations for growth. And of course, around sort of public service, government have a big role to play. They have issues around tax collection. We've got issues around, ensuring that we are recording information so that we can use that information for policy formulation. Absolutely critical. And of course, the supply chain is not, it's not news, actually, because supply chain and blockchain and the transparency that comes with supply chain is nothing new. You have groups like Maersk who've been involved in tracking, produce and looking at food provenance, for example, as well. We're looking at things like food security issues. Do we all know where our food is coming from? Are we supporting the farmers and the local agricultural places that our food, our tomatoes, our mangoes, our rice, whatever it is that we're enjoying, are we supporting them? How do we know that they're getting the right price for their food and their commodities? Through tracking and looking at a blockchain-based platform, I think that's fundamental. And we're helping to actually equip and almost include everybody else within the society to interact as well, which is absolutely significant, I think. And certainly, access to financial inclusion, again, this is the softer side that we don't hear so much about. This is the less sexy side in terms of blockchain, where we don't hear so much about the opportunities for those that are not necessarily in the global system. I think they predict something like up to 2 billion people cannot trade or interact online because they don't have access to a bank account, because they don't have, credit worthiness. I think that needs to kind of shift, and that needs to stop, because we have to be in a situation where everybody can be have that financial inclusion, and therefore have the empowerment to interact in society and contribute in society in terms of growth and opportunities. So absolutely fundamental. We're no longer sitting in the areas where we have centralized just the banks. You have to go to a bank in order for you to interact. The world is a very different place. But in order, for people to progress, it's important that we tap in some of these tools to do that. So what's the future looking like? I really do love this picture because it says a lot in just the picture itself. A lot of people are equipped. We all have our mobile phones. We all have our mobile. I'm not so sure. Is it the baby who's thinking, okay, what's mommy doing? Is she too busy on her phone? She can't be bothered with myself. Or mommy is thinking, no, actually, I'm going to use this technology. I'm going to try and do my business. I'm going to interact with the world, and generate the income and the revenue that I need to feed my child. So absolutely fundamental. I think there's something there around how do we ensure that we are including everybody in society. We're not leaving people behind, and I think with this technology, there's opportunities to do that. It's a network effect where you have, interaction with the whole global players, and you can connect and interact. Massive opportunity in Africa, I think, especially for corporates, businesses. A lot of people have access to mobile phones. That's a channel to interact. That's a channel for you to connect with consumers in this part of the world. Are we developing those dApps that we heard about? That can be accessed by the lady over here. Are we developing educational toolkits? Or dApps that can be put on that mobile phone so people can learn. You don't necessarily have to read and write. It's a graphical world. You can look at the graphics and learn what you're doing. And it's already happening. It's already happening. So there are opportunities to grow and scale up and support using, the technologies that we do have. And then certainly, banks like EcoBank have started doing that and are very much interacting in this market. There are issues, of course, around data. Data is a big thing. To be honest with you. And a lot of companies, which we all know about, the big names, the Googles and all that, of course, have massive amounts of data. But we are moving to a model where I think I'd like to see a lot of the ownership remain with the individual. a lot of control of the data should remain with the individual. And there should be more, I should have more say to decide what Facebook or Google or whoever does with my data. And we're very much looking towards that avenue. To a certain degree, I should have the opportunity to monetize the data that I have, and then charge for my data before you can use my data. But data is significant. And with blockchain, again, you can secure your data, you can store your data, you can monitor your data, there's audit trails. But for government and other players, which a lot of people say, oh, government's banks insignificant now because we've got blockchain. No, absolutely not. I totally disagree with that. Government have a big role to play. Not in terms of course, in terms of regulation and looking at all that, but you cannot regulate something you do not necessarily fully understand. You must begin to understand what are the opportunities there, what are the challenges, interact with the developers, with the people within the blockchain community to actually understand what is it that we actually need to think about here. Yes, consumer protection, absolutely fundamental. Yes, data protection, absolutely fundamental. But also we have to encourage data flows, ladies and gentlemen, because without data flows, for example, we cannot go and tackle health crises, for example. We can't look at tackling things like, cancer. Research that is being done and opportunities to access data to look at things like that, healthcare, and transform healthcare, absolutely fundamental. Of course, there are controls that have to be implemented around that. So I think data is a big, big thing at the minute. You have a lot of groups introducing their own coins at the minute. I think JP Morgan did just recently. But imagine the amount of data that JP will collect as a result of that transactional, interaction of all those accounts that they're using their tokens and all that. What is going to happen with that data? Is there protection around that data? Huge discussion around that. dApps I've talked about, absolutely fundamental, and the speaker previously talked about it. But also looking into the tokenomics, which is a hot topic at the minute. We've heard about tokenomics all day, and yesterday as well. A lot of things are going to be tokenized, asset-backed, tokenomics. This is something I think that is definitely in the future. It is happening already. People are exploring a lot more. It's significant for Africa. Absolutely significant for Africa because we are very rich in resources. And I'm not just talking about natural resources, oil, gas, everything that we're all familiar with. We have resources, we've got young people, those are resources. We've got women leaders, who can transform and who are transforming our local communities and villages. Those are resources. By the end of the day, you want to tokenize land, you want to tokenize gold, you want to tokenize all the assets. Yes, absolutely fundamental. But it should be at the terms that are favorable to the continent. So it's important to understand tokenomics. It's important to get engaged with it. But what does it mean for the continent? How can we tap on it so that it's ensuring that there's growth for that, for ourselves as well? Education, again, I keep emphasizing on education because I don't think there's enough of it. I don't think there's enough emphasis on education. I don't think it's spoken about enough. Without education, without people understanding something, you cannot go and negotiate. You cannot go and leverage that and use that to your advantage to gain something. So, my mother always told me, she says, if there's anything that you should always hold, is what you have up here. Because that can't be taken away from you. You're building yourself up, you're learning constantly. And we're all learning all the time. This is a new area, but we do need to educate. And we do need to equip people so that they're able to tap on it. And society. Engage in society. I think everybody is familiar in this room with the concept of blockchain. But if I walk on the road and I'm speaking to, the taxi driver, I'm speaking to people, what does blockchain mean to them? Do they have to understand blockchain? Or do they have to understand what's behind it and what they can actually do, using their mobile phone or using whatever else that they've got devices? I think that's important. It's important for adoption. Because if you have adoption, then they're more likely that we're going to use these tools at scale. Rather than speaking about them individually. Ethereum is doing this, Hyperledger is doing this, that one is doing that. We're talking about scalability here. We need to look into scalability. That's how we're going to reach mass adoption. And then we're not working in isolation. I mean, of course, blockchain is significant, but blockchain is not, on its own. We have to think about IoT. We have to talk about, the devices. It is predicted it will be worth $1.7 trillion, of IoT devices. How does that work? How do we connect? A lot of people are using their devices to connect. How do we ensure we can tap on AI and the fusion of blockchain and AI to grow our activities? Absolutely fundamental. We can't look at blockchain in isolation. And again, I've talked very much around here, the opportunities, the value that is created, back to my argument around value, the value that's created by these interconnected global devices, which are speaking to one another, are creating products and services, are helping the world connect, I think is absolutely significant. And then let's not forget talent, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, talent is huge. Huge for the continent. We have a huge amount of young people not, fully utilizing their capabilities. Why is that? Okay, we need to be able to look at talent and building talent. And there are loads of platforms at the minute where young people can connect, but does everybody have access to that internet broadband, for example? Can they connect? Can they go and look for jobs? Can they look for internships, vocational training? It's not just about, having PhDs and having, sort of fancy education qualifications. Not everybody has to go to university, but they can develop skills on the job. They can work and they can train. And how are we helping them connect? How are we growing our talent pipeline? Are we building talent that has the skills of the future? That is so significant, I think. So what does the future look like? This is in the concept of blockchain adoption. From British Blockchain Association, actually, we do champion realistic analysis of where blockchain is heading and other technologies or the digital economy as a whole. Certainly, we've seen a lot of activity. In 2017, 2018, we had the ICO craze, which has obviously died down. There's a lot more focus on STOs at the minute, and rightly so. And a lot more confidence, I think, that's coming with STOs from investors as well, because of the asset-backed, transactions behind that. We're seeing a lot more new players coming in, but there's a lot more in the backgrounds. I mean, if you're in the blockchain world, in the backgrounds, you're a lot of SMEs and startup companies who are busy working in the background, developers who are, looking at sorting the problems around interoperability, scalability, quietly, and are looking at solving this problem. I think that's what's happening now. In 2018, we're going to see a lot more realistic use cases. Use cases that are looking like they have the potential for scalability. And that's what is exciting. And a lot of that is also coming from the continent. So a lot of the times, I travel around the world, people say to me, oh no, a lot of the talent is in Asia or it's in Eastern Europe. No, some of the talent is here. You just haven't heard about it. You just haven't met them or they haven't just got their visibility. They are there, but they need to be supported, which is absolutely fundamental. By sort of 2025, 2030, we're going to start seeing a lot more maturity around this space. I will get to a point where you're not hearing people kind of mention the word even blockchain anymore, but they are using that technology behind it. It's not about the tech. It's about what we're using it for. There are already 50 real-world use cases, but out of all those, how many are actually, sort of scalable? Massive, massive opportunities. There's a lot of work going on behind the backgrounds, and this was just from last year. This technology is moving so fast. If I had to do this research over again, I'm sure it'll be an addition of I don't know how many more blockchain use cases. But out of all those use cases, which ones are the scalable ones? Which ones can we deploy so that we are making differences across the Commonwealth countries? To tackle things, natural disasters, to look at things like trade, as I say, to look at food security, to look at agriculture, manufacturing, especially for Africa. I don't think we need to carry on anymore to be consuming, products that are made in elsewhere, using our raw materials. Yeah, we need to be able to be creating end-to-end products and services in Africa that are tradable across the continent, that are tradable across different parts of Africa and growing the continent. I think there's a recipe for success there. Those are my contact details. If anybody has any further questions, more than happy to pick them up, and very excited to be here, and speaking to all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
That's all right.
Any questions for Michelle?
Thank you very much for that presentation. My name is Toela. I work with the NEPAD agency, which is a technical agency of the African Union. So very happy to see you situating blockchains in the context of Africa. So my question for you, maybe simple, maybe not, but if you had one message for the African Union as far as blockchains are concerned, what is that message?
Sure. Gosh, I have several messages, but I'll try and pick on the best one. I think it's important that we really do genuinely start to look at blockchain as an enabler for economic growth across all the countries. I'm really starting to pay attention to blockchain. I'm not talking about Bitcoin. I'm not talking about cryptocurrency. I'm not talking about just tokens. We're going beyond that. There are massive opportunities with this technology if it is well understood. To tap on it to help with a lot of the challenges that African Union is dealing with all the time. We talk about unemployment, youth unemployment, engagement, access to trade, access to finance, foreign direct investment, you know, the perceptions of risk in the continent, which sometimes it's a lot about just perception. You know, how do we tackle that? I think this technology has opportunities to do that if it's well understood. And I would love to, you know, to obviously talk to the African Union to present how, you know, this technology can be tackled, because I think there's still a lack of engagement with the technology at that level. We're hearing about, you know, the use cases that are happening, which is fantastic, but when you're looking at it on a more strategic level, you know, of trying to address some of the challenges that we're facing across the continent, I think it's fundamental to not ignore this tool, because it's a pretty powerful tool, you know, that we can tackle.
Wonderful. Michelle, thank you so much.